Anyone else have any more questions for Lisa or just comments in general about things?
Quick question. I noticed you used a sans serif type font. Was that deliberate? Because in my experience, the serifs are generally easier for people to read.
Usually I use Calibri. I think that wasn't deliberate, but it's interesting that you mentioned that. I'll remember that.
Yeah, and the other thing, I've written a lot of direct mail letters. It's good. So some of the things I've learned is, shorter sentences. I usually do like bullets, like, rather than a paragraph, I'll say, my experiences include, and do bullets: managing, handling, meeting, budget, kind of do a bulleted list of the accomplishments, and just to try to keep it not being so dense copy blocks, so that it's more visually, I always, coming from marketing, you're looking at the visual appeal of the letter.
Good point.
Yeah. Just what I'm thinking too, there was a comment the recruiters made when we asked them in another session what their thoughts were about cover letters and how important it was. And one recruiter who'd been around the block a while said they kind of would use them as a tiebreaker. Like if you had two candidates were really so close, but one went ahead and wrote a cover letter, then they might lean toward that candidate. So I think that just, again, is like one of those underlying factors that says, yeah, go ahead and do it. And I would think too, it's like a resume. It gets easier in time. And Lisa, you really laid out a nice system. Because if you have a system, you can kind of go back to and track things. And you talked, which I really appreciate, the interweaving of that with the team A and the interview and things like that, because it all does fit together. They're not, when you look at it that way, I think that just makes, I just think it makes more sense. You can use the cover letter for different things in your columns and things like that. So, yeah.
Somebody had a question?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. It's been a while since I've been doing a job search. It's been a while since I've done cover letters, and I like the system that you have with the two columns. But what I've found in the past when I was doing cover letters that frustrated me was I felt like the language that you use is so stale and kind of rote. And in terms of talking about what their needs are and what your experience is, that part is great. But when it comes to kind of the general language that's used in the opening and closing paragraphs, that always feels so stale to me. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it always seems like it's something that everybody uses. So are they just gonna not read it because they're just used to seeing that kind of language, and they just kind of gloss over it because of that?
I don't know. I mean, I guess you could look at that from two different perspectives. You could say, yes, everybody more or less says the same thing. That's why I always put at the end, the closing, I hope you call me for an interview. And it's simple, it's to the point, and it lets them know I really want this job. So yeah, it is stale. But on the other hand, and I don't want to sound judgmental when I say this, but there are some people that don't, if you don't use, we're now kind of, how do I say this? Sometimes there's a habit to be really casual in conversations that should be more formal. And at least this has been sometimes my experience. And so I think you could look at it by being formal. At least you're telling them that you know how to be professional and be formal in your conversation. which is probably something that they're looking for. So that's a competency.
Mhm.
And you have shown them that you can engage properly in that type of conversation. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.